The clinking of forks and the low murmur of conversation filled Murphy's Diner, a small-town hangout with red vinyl booths and coffee that never stopped flowing. The breakfast rush was settling down when the door swung open, and Sam Washington, a 72-year-old black man with a limp and a quiet presence, stepped inside. He wore a simple cardigan, his veteran's cap tucked under one arm, and carried himself with the tired dignity of someone who had seen too much of life but still refused to bow to it. Sam had been a regular here for years. Every Tuesday he ordered the same thing: wheat toast and black coffee. To him, it wasn't just a meal, it was routine, a small ritual of normalcy after decades of sacrifice. But today was different. In the far corner sat Brad Morrison, a wealthy white developer who believed the diner was his personal clubhouse. Brad leaned back in the booth with two of his friends, loud and arrogant, gold rings flashing under the neon light. He spotted Sam immediately and smirked. "Look who it is," Brad sneered, his voice carrying across the room. "Old Man Ghetto. Surprised you can even afford toast these days. What's the matter? Welfare check run out?" The diner went quiet. Conversations died mid-sentence. All eyes flicked toward Sam. Some regulars frowned, others lowered their heads, unwilling to interfere. Sam paused, straightened his cardigan, and kept walking. He didn't dignify the insult with a response. That only fueled Brad. He shoved himself out of the booth, blocking Sam's path. "I'm talking to you, boy." The word boy stung like acid. A deliberate echo of a time when men like Brad believed dignity had a skin color. Sam met his gaze, calm but firm. "Step aside," Brad laughed. "Step aside? You're lucky I even let your kind in here. This is a family place, not a soup kitchen. Why don't you take your thrift store sweater and crawl back where you came from?" Phones came out. A waitress whispered, "Oh my God, he's recording this." Another customer tilted her phone up to capture the scene. Brad leaned closer, his breath heavy with whiskey, though it was barely past 10 a.m. "You know what? People like you never learn until someone teaches you." Then it happened. Fast, shocking. Brad slapped Sam across the face, the sound echoing through the diner like a gunshot. Gasps erupted. Silverware clattered. The manager shouted, "Brad, stop!" But no one stepped between them. Sam's cheek burned red, his eyes glistening, not from weakness, but from the weight of humiliation. He clenched his jaw, refusing to fall. His hands remained steady at his sides, though every muscle screamed to react. Brad stood over him, triumphant. "See? Weak. Nothing but a poor, washed-up vet. Nobody cares about you, old man. Nobody." But Brad was wrong. Several phones had caught every second. The slap, the insult, the smug smirk. Within hours, the video would spread. And within days, Brad Morrison would discover just how wrong he was, because Sam Washington was not just an old man in a cardigan. He was the father of James Washington, the head of Homeland Security. And Brad Morrison had just started a war he could never win. The sting of the slap lingered on Sam's face long after he sat down in the booth, his coffee untouched. Around him, whispers filled the diner, but he stared at the table, his reflection blurred in the polished chrome napkin holder. For a moment, Sam's mind drifted, not to anger, but to memory. Flashback. 40 years earlier, the battlefield was chaos. Dust filled the air, smoke rising from burning vehicles. Amidst it all, a young Sergeant Sam Washington carried a wounded soldier on his back, ignoring the bullets whizzing overhead. His uniform was torn, blood streaking down his arm, but he kept moving. "Stay with me," he shouted to the soldier. They made it behind cover. Moments later, a medic rushed in. The soldier lived. Sam had saved him. Later, when the war ended, they pinned a purple heart to Sam's chest. He didn't brag about it. He never bragged about anything. To him, Service was duty, not glory. Back in the present, Sam rubbed his forehead, remembering the weight of that medal now tucked in a small box at home. It had been years since anyone asked about his service. In Millbrook, he was just another old man. But service had left scars. His limp came from shrapnel lodged too deep to remove. His heart carried stress that medication barely controlled. Yet he never complained. He only smiled, tipped waitresses generously, and lived quietly. That quiet life had its burdens. Sam's wife had passed a decade earlier, leaving him alone in the modest house they built together. His only son, James, worked far away in Washington, D.C., a man with responsibilities so vast Sam barely understood them. Their calls were short, but filled with pride. James always promised to visit when he could. And now, humiliation. Public, cruel, unavoidable. At another table, Maria Santos, a waitress and single mother, fought back tears of rage as she wiped down counters. She knew Sam. He always asked about her kids, always tipped, even when she told him not to. Watching him slapped by Brad Morrison cut her to the bone. But Maria needed her job. Brad's family had influence in town, and speaking up could mean retaliation. Nearby, Tommy Carter, a teenage film student, had captured the whole incident on his phone. He admired Mr. Washington ever since he'd interviewed him for a school project about veterans. Seeing his hero treated like trash made his hands shake as he pressed save. "This is going online," he whispered. "People need to see this." For Sam, the stakes were personal. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He thought of Maria, of Tommy, of every young person who'd ever been told they weren't enough. But in that moment, he also felt fear. He thought of James. His son carried the weight of national security on his shoulders. Sam worried about dragging him into small-town prejudice. But bullies thrived in silence. And as Sam sat in that booth, his untouched coffee growing cold, he realized this wasn't just about him being slapped in a diner. This was about every insult he'd swallowed for decades, every microaggression endured, every door closed to men who looked like him. The humiliation in Murphy's diner was only the spark. What came next would ignite an entire movement. The slap had settled like a storm cloud over Murphy's diner, but the storm itself was only beginning. Brad Morrison, puffed up with arrogance, strutted back to his booth as though he'd accomplished something. His friends chuckled nervously, one muttering, "Man, you didn't have to hit him like that." Brad scoffed. "Please, someone's got to remind people like him of their place. This town was better before his kind started thinking they belonged everywhere." The words spread through the diner like poison. Phones kept recording. The atmosphere grew tense, divided between those who wanted to step in and those who lowered their eyes, pretending not to see. Sam sat silently, his cheeks still burning, his dignity intact. He refused to leave. Not because he wasn't hurt, but because leaving would be surrender. He adjusted his cardigan, straightened his posture, and stared forward with the kind of patience that comes only from years of discipline. Brad wasn't finished. He marched back over, looming above Sam's booth. "What's wrong, old man? Cat got your tongue? Or maybe you're just too used to being ordered around." "Brad, that's enough," the manager, Mr. Miller, said, his voice shaking. "Sit down or leave." Brad turned on him. "Don't you dare tell me what to do. My company pays half your bills. Without the Morrison Development Project, this dump would have closed years ago." Sam quietly sipped his coffee, ignoring the stares. That composure, his refusal to rise to the bait, only enraged Brad further. "You think you're better than me?" Brad hissed, lowering his voice so only nearby tables could hear. "Sitting here like you deserve respect. You don't deserve anything." Then, louder, so the whole diner could hear, "This man's nothing but a washed-up thug pretending to be a hero. Probably faked his medals, too. Parasites like him don't serve. They scam, gasps echoed. Maria Santos dropped her tray, hands trembling. Tommy Carter's phone caught every word. Within minutes, 2 local deputies arrived. Someone had called the sheriff. Sheriff Hayes, a stocky man with tired eyes, stepped into the diner, his badge gleaming. He glanced at Brad, then at Sam, and immediately sided with power. "What's the problem here?" Hayes asked, though his gaze lingered on Sam as if he were the trouble. Brad put on a mask of innocence. "Sheriff, this man came in here, mouthing off, making a scene. I had to put him in his place before he scared the customers." "That's a lie," Maria burst out, her voice shaking but determined. "Brad slapped him for no reason. Everybody saw it." Hayes ignored her. "Mr. Washington, maybe it's best if you head on home. Don't stir things up." Sam met his eyes calmly. "I didn't stir anything. I came here for coffee." Hayes shifted uncomfortably. "Then leave with your coffee. No need for this to escalate." But it was already escalating. Phones captured every second. The sheriff's dismissal, Brad's smug grin, Maria's protests. The crowd murmured, torn between fear and outrage. Tommy stepped forward, holding up his phone. "Sheriff, I have it all on video. The slap, the insults, everything. You can't just ignore this." Brad's face reddened. "Delete that now, kid, or you'll regret it." Sam placed a steady hand on Tommy's shoulder. "Don't. The truth matters." For the first time, Brad faltered. Something in Sam's quiet resolve unnerved him, like a lion who doesn't need to roar to remind you he's dangerous. "Sheriff," Sam said, his voice low but commanding, "I've lived in this town longer than Brad has thrown his weight around. If you want me to leave, that's fine. But know this. Silence doesn't erase what happened. It only proves it." The diner fell silent. Phones stayed raised. Hayes cleared his throat. "All right, enough. Mr. Morrison, Mr. Washington, both of you, keep your distance. Let's not make this a bigger deal than it is." But it was already bigger, much bigger. By the time Sam left the diner, the video had already gone viral. Tommy uploaded it with the caption, "Elderly black veteran slapped in Millbrook diner. Is this America?" Within an hour, it had 10,000 views. By sundown, 200,000. Outrage spread across social media. Hashtags trended. Shouta justice for Sam. Respect our veterans. End the hate. Brad's version of events collapsed under the weight of evidence. Every angle, every insult, every racist word was replayed endlessly online. But Brad still felt untouchable. At home, sipping whiskey, he laughed at the woke mob on his phone. They'll forget in a week. They always do. What Brad didn't realize was that he hadn't just slapped a man, he'd slapped a Washington. And while Sam remained calm, dignified and silent, a storm was brewing hundreds of miles away in Washington, D.C. James Washington, head of Homeland Security, was watching the same video. His hands tightened into fists. Someone had humiliated his father, and James had the power to bring the entire weight of the federal government down on Millbrook if he chose. The bully thought he'd silenced a man. In reality, he had awakened an army. The next morning, Murphy's diner looked the same from the outside, its neon sign buzzing faintly, the smell of bacon and coffee drifting into the cool air. But inside, it was anything but ordinary. Reporters crowded the booths. Cameras flashed. Activists held up signs outside. Respect black veterans, dignity for all, and justice for Sam. Brad Morrison stormed in, red-faced. "This is ridiculous. This is my town. These outsiders need to pack up and leave." He pushed past the crowd, heading straight for the counter where Sam was quietly drinking his coffee again, sitting at the same spot as yesterday. His calm presence seemed almost defiant. "Look at this," Brad sneered, gesturing to the crowd. "You've turned my diner into a circus." "You should be ashamed, old man." Sam didn't answer. He simply lifted his eyes, steady and unflinching. "Truth has a way of drawing people, Brad. Even when you don't like it," the crowd murmured in agreement. Just then, the diner doors swung open with authority. A tall man in a tailored dark suit stepped inside, flanked by two federal agents in black. His stride was purposeful, his expression unreadable, but the air shifted instantly. Everyone recognized power when it walked into a room. It was James Washington, head of Homeland Security. Brad froze, confused. The reporters gasped. Maria Santos covered her mouth. Tommy whispered, "That's him. That's the guy from the news. The big guy in D.C." James scanned the room, then locked eyes on one man. His father. "Dad," he said, his voice steady but layered with emotion. "You all right?" Sam smiled faintly, pride in his eyes. "I'm all right, son." The diner fell silent. People looked back and forth between the quiet, dignified veteran and the powerful federal leader now standing protectively at his side. Brad's smugness drained from his face. He took a stumbling step backward. "Wait, that's your father?" James turned to him, his eyes sharp. "Yes, that man you slapped, insulted, and degraded in front of the world. He's my father. And more importantly, he's an American veteran who bled for this country while men like you sat in cushioned offices pretending to matter." The words hit like thunder. Reporters' cameras flashed wildly, capturing every moment. Brad stammered, I didn't know." "That's the problem," James cut in coldly. "You didn't care to know. You saw his skin, his age, his clothes, and you decided he was beneath you. You thought humiliating him would make you powerful." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Brad could hear. But the entire diner felt the tension. "You've made a very big mistake." Brad swallowed hard. His voice cracked. "Look, I was just messing around." "No harm meant." James's jaw tightened. "You slapped a decorated veteran. You called him trash. You tried to erase his dignity in front of strangers. Tell me, Mr. Morrison, what part of that was messing around?" The diner crowd leaned forward, hanging on every word. Brad's confidence was gone, replaced by trembling panic. James turned to the sheriff, who had entered quietly, trying to avoid notice. "Sheriff Hayes," James said, his tone sharp as a blade. "I watched your response yesterday. I watched you dismiss witnesses. I watched you try to push my father out of this diner instead of addressing the criminal who assaulted him. Care to explain that?" Hayes stuttered, sweat forming on his forehead. I was just trying to keep the peace." "No," James interrupted. "You were protecting power. You were protecting prejudice. And now, the entire country has seen you do it." The sheriff lowered his head, defeated. James faced the crowd, his voice carrying the authority of his office. "Let today be clear. No man, no woman, no veteran, no citizen should ever be humiliated for the color of their skin, for their age, or for where they come from. Racism isn't just ugly, it's un-American. And when it shows its face, whether in the halls of Congress or in a small-town diner, it must be confronted." The crowd erupted in applause, some with tears in their eyes. Maria cried openly. Tommy grinned, capturing every second on his phone. Brad, shaking now, whispered desperately, "Please, Mr. Washington, I didn't know who he was. If I had—" James turned his gaze back to him, his voice like ice. "That's exactly the point. You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with dignity." The silence that followed was deafening. Brad looked around, but there was no lifeline left. Reporters were circling, microphones thrust forward. His reputation was crumbling before his eyes, and then James delivered the final blow. "You've embarrassed yourself, your company, and this entire town. Effective immediately, Homeland Security will be reviewing every federal contract your company holds. And as for your future here," James glanced at the reporters, I think the American people will decide that. The crowd gasped. Brad stumbled back into his booth, pale and broken. Sam finally spoke again, his voice calm, steady, and dignified. "Son, that's enough." James looked at him, surprised. Sam's eyes held the wisdom of years. Justice isn't about destroying a man. It's about reminding him of what's right. Let the world judge him. We've done our part. James exhaled slowly, nodding in respect. Even in the face of hate, his father chose grace. The diner erupted in applause once more. Not just for James, not just for Sam, but for the truth that had finally been spoken aloud. The diner buzzed with an energy that hadn't been felt in years. What began as humiliation had transformed into a public courtroom, and the verdict was clear. Sam sat quietly, his weathered hands folded on the table, while James remained standing, every inch the authoritative figure. Brad Morrison, once puffed up with arrogance, was now reduced to a trembling man, sweat glistening on his forehead. But James wasn't finished. He motioned for one of his agents, who immediately handed him a sleek black folder. James laid it flat on the counter in front of Brad. "Inside this," James said firmly, "are the federal contracts Morrison Development Group has signed with Homeland Security over the last 5 years. Infrastructure, surveillance systems, logistics. Billions of taxpayer dollars." Gasps rippled through the diner. Maria's hand flew to her mouth. Tommy's phone camera zoomed in. James flipped open the folder, showing documents stamped with government seals. "Do you know what I see when I review these, Brad? Patterns, overbilling, shoddy work, kickbacks hidden under subcontracts." Brad's face drained of all color. "I could have overlooked them, maybe even assumed clerical error. But yesterday—" James leaned forward, his voice low and cutting. "You gave me a reason to look harder. You put a spotlight on yourself. And now, every irregularity will be investigated. Every contract will be reviewed. Every dollar accounted for." The crowd erupted into murmurs of shock and approval. Brad stammered, his voice breaking. You can't do this. You'll ruin me." James's gaze was ice. "No, Brad. You ruined yourself the moment you believed you were untouchable. The moment you thought my father was beneath you. The moment you forgot accountability exists." He snapped the folder shut with finality. The sound echoed through the diner like a gavel. Then James turned to the sheriff, still lingering near the door. "Hat in hand?" "Sheriff Hayes," James said, "as of this morning, the Department of Justice has been notified of your misconduct. Negligence, abuse of authority, failure to protect citizens. You tried to dismiss an assault because the victim was a black man. That ends today." Hayes opened his mouth, but James cut him off. "Your badge will be reviewed. Your actions will be investigated. And if I were you, I'd be talking to a lawyer, not me." The sheriff lowered his head, shame etched into his every line. Sam raised his hand gently. "James," but his son shook his head. "No, Dad. They need to understand the cost of their hate." He turned back to Brad. "Let's talk numbers. Morrison Development employs nearly 500 people in this county, doesn't it?" Brad swallowed hard. Yes. "And your company is leveraged against government contracts. Without those, your stock value will collapse. Investors will pull out. Banks will call in loans. Within 6 months, Morrison Development will be on life support. Within a year, gone." The diner was silent. Everyone could hear Brad's ragged bray. James continued, his words deliberate. "That's the price of arrogance. You thought a slap and a few cruel words were harmless. But prejudice is never harmless. It corrodes character, destroys communities, and in this case, destroys fortunes." Brad dropped into a booth, burying his face in his hands. For the first time, the man who once strutted through town like a king looked small. Maria, emboldened by James's presence, stepped forward. "Do you know what it's like, Mr. Morrison, to worry every day about losing your job just because you speak up? Do you know what it's like to bite your tongue when customers insult you because you need to feed your kids?" Brad didn't answer. She turned to James. "Thank you. Thank you for showing him there are consequences." James nodded, his eyes softening for a moment. Consequences make change possible. Tommy raised his phone, trembling with excitement. "Mr. Washington, the whole world is watching. This video's already gone viral. Millions of views. People are calling Sam a hero." Sam looked startled, then chuckled softly. "Hero? I just came here for coffee." The crowd laughed, easing the tension for a heartbeat. But James wasn't done. He faced Brad one last time. "You have two choices. You can fight this, drag it out in the courts, lose everything slowly and painfully. Or," he paused, letting the silence stretch, "you can accept accountability, publicly. You can step down from your company, admit what you've done, and start making amends. Fund scholarships for veterans. Support community programs. Use your resources to repair the harm you've caused. That path might give you a shred of redemption." Brad looked up, his eyes bloodshot. You'd let me keep something? Anything?" James's voice was measured. "That's not up to me. That's up to the people you've harmed. But I will tell you this. Redemption is possible. But only if you face the truth." The diner was still. Everyone waited. Sam finally spoke, his voice deep, steady, and commanding. "Brad, men like you think respect is owed to power. It isn't. Respect is owed to humanity. You slapped me because you thought I was nobody. But every person you look down on is somebody. Remember that." The silence stretched before Brad broke down completely, his shoulders shaking. The reckoning had come, not with fists or fury, but with truth, accountability, and justice. The diner felt like a courtroom where the verdict had already been spoken. Reporters whispered furiously into phones. Maria stood tall with tears drying on her cheeks, and Tommy kept filming, his lens capturing every twitch of Brad's face. Sam remained calm, sipping his now cold coffee, while James's presence radiated control. At last, Brad lifted his head, eyes swollen, pride shattered. His voice cracked. I'll do it. I'll resign. I'll make it right," the crowd gasped. Maria blinked, hardly believing it. Tommy muttered, "He's actually folding." James studied him with hard eyes. "Words are cheap, Brad. Accountability isn't a speech. It's a process." Brad nodded frantically. "Then tell me what to do, please. Just don't destroy my family." Sam's voice cut in gently, but firmly. "Your family's safety was never in danger, Brad. You were, because you chose hate over decency." Brad lowered his gaze, ashamed. James stepped forward, his voice even. "Here's what happens next. Tomorrow morning, you'll call a press conference. You'll publicly apologize, not just to my father, but to every veteran, every Black American, every worker you've demeaned. You'll admit your misconduct, both here in this diner and in your business practices. Then, you'll pledge a portion of your wealth toward community rebuilding and veteran programs." Brad looked up, lips trembling. "And if I do that?" James didn't soften. "Then maybe, just maybe, you'll earn a path forward. Not back to your throne, but toward something better. The choice is yours." The room stayed hushed. Reporters scribbled notes furiously. Maria whispered, "That's justice." "That's real justice." Sam leaned back, his wise eyes on Brad. "Redemption isn't found in saving yourself, son. It's found in serving others. If you mean these words, show them in your deeds." Brad nodded weakly, unable to meet Sam's gaze. The sheriff cleared his throat nervously. "And me?" James didn't even look at him. "You'll face your investigation. If you're smart, you'll cooperate and learn from your failure. Maybe someday you'll earn trust again. But for now, you step aside." The sheriff bowed his head in shame, the weight of disgrace pressing on him. As the tension broke, the diner filled with murmurs of hope. Maria exhaled, whispering to Sam, "You changed everything today." Sam chuckled softly. "I didn't change a thing. The truth was always there. People just had to see it." Tommy looked up from his phone, his face glowing. "They're seeing it, Mr. Washington. Millions are seeing it." Outside, the chants grew louder. Reporters rushed to broadcast breaking news, and in the center of it all, Sam, quiet, dignified, humble, remained the anchor. Justice had been served, but not through fists or fury, through choice, through accountability, through the courage to confront hate with dignity. Brad Morrison's fate was sealed, not by destruction alone, but by the chance at redemption he never thought he'd need. And in that diner, the world witnessed a truth too powerful to ignore. The measure of a man isn't in his wealth or power, but in his humanity. The next morning, Millbrook woke to headlines that rippled far beyond its borders. Local business tycoon publicly apologizes after racist assault on black veteran. Homeland Security Chief's father targeted in small-town hate crime. Community reckoning in Millbrook. Change at last. News trucks filled the streets, satellite dishes pointing skyward. By noon, clips from the diner had already gone viral. Tommy's raw footage of the slap, Maria's trembling testimony, and Sam's dignified words. Hashtags exploded across every platform. Cedars, justice for Sam. John's veterans stand tall. Scheidsuns respect our elders. Attend to hey yours. 8 a.m. Brad Morrison stepped up to a podium outside his office, hands visibly shaking. Cameras flashed. For the first time in years, the man looked smaller, almost fragile. "I stand before you today ashamed," he began, voice breaking. "I allowed arrogance, racism, and cruelty to define my actions. I disrespected a man who served this country, who has more dignity in his silence than I ever had in my words. I humiliated him, and by extension, I humiliated this community." He paused, swallowing hard as hecklers shouted from the crowd. "I cannot undo what I've done, but I can, and I will, make restitution. Effective immediately, I am resigning from all leadership positions, including the Chamber of Commerce and my family's business. I will dedicate resources toward community rebuilding, veteran health care, and scholarships for underprivileged youth." Some clapped cautiously, others jeered, but the words were spoken, and cameras carried them to millions. Sam, watching from home with James and Maria, shook his head. "Words are easy. Time will tell if he means it," James agreed. "That's why we'll make sure accountability stays in place." 6 months later, Millbrook had changed. Not perfectly, not fully, but undeniably. Murphy's Diner, once the stage of humiliation, now had a plaque near the front door. "In honor of Sam Washington, whose dignity changed our town." Business boomed, not from scandal but from solidarity. Families drove in from neighboring counties just to eat where justice was born. Maria, once a fearful waitress, now split her time between city council meetings and hosting weekend shifts at the diner, her apron tied proudly over her mayoral sash. Tommy Carter, the young filmmaker, became something of a local celebrity. His documentary, Dignity Under Fire, The Sam Washington Story, won a statewide award and earned him a scholarship to film school. His work inspired dozens of students to start storytelling clubs, documenting their own communities. As for Brad Morrison, the mighty had indeed fallen. His empire collapsed under federal investigations. Loans called in, contracts severed, former allies scattered. But in the rubble, Brad did something unexpected. He showed up. Quietly, without cameras, he began volunteering at veteran centers, scrubbing floors, hauling boxes, sitting with men whose stories mirrored Sam's. Some said it was a PR stunt. Others whispered it was genuine repentance. Time, again, would tell. The sheriff resigned 2 months after the incident, citing personal reasons. The truth? He couldn't walk down Main Street without seeing shame in every face that passed him. Replaced by Fire Chief Rodriguez, law enforcement began a slow, painful rebuild. Diversity training, oversight boards, and, most importantly, the trust of the people. Nationally, the ripple was undeniable. Civil rights groups cited Millbrook as a case study in modern accountability. Veterans across the country wrote letters to Sam, calling him a quiet giant, thanking him for standing tall when it mattered most. One letter in particular stood out. It came from a 19-year-old recruit stationed at Fort Benning. "Sir, I watched the video of you standing in that diner. I want you to know, when I serve, I'll carry that dignity with me, because you showed me what strength really looks like." Sam read it twice, his hands trembling slightly. Then he folded it, tucked it in the pocket of his cardigan, and wore it close to his heart. The greatest ripple, however, was less visible. Families in Millbrook, who once walked with eyes downcast, began to look each other in the eye. Neighbors started conversations they'd avoided for years. Church groups partnered across racial lines for food drives. The town's first Unity Festival drew thousands, complete with music, food, and veterans honored as guests of honor. Sam, sitting quietly at the edge of the festival, smiled as children of all colors danced together. Maria spotted him and approached. "You see this? This is because of you." Sam shook his head softly. "No, this is because people finally saw the truth. All I did was stand still." And in that moment, under lantern lights strung across the park, Millbrook no longer felt like the same town. It felt like a place where change wasn't just possible. It was happening. The slap that was meant to break one man had instead awakened an entire community. The story of Millbrook didn't end in that diner, or even at the town festival. It became something bigger, a reminder of what happens when dignity stands tall against hatred. Sam Washington never set out to be a hero. He wasn't looking for attention or revenge or headlines. He just wanted a cup of coffee and a quiet morning. But when injustice struck, he chose not to break, not to lash out, but to stand firm in the truth of who he was. And that truth shook an entire system. The lesson is clear. Never assume someone's worth by the clothes they wear, the color of their skin, or the balance in their bank account. Respect isn't something granted by status. It's a right carried by every human being. Brad Morrison learned that the hard way. For years, he wielded money and prejudice like weapons, believing they made him untouchable. But arrogance crumbles quickly when faced with dignity that refuses to bow. And Sam proved something greater, that justice doesn't always roar with fists or fury. Sometimes it sits quietly, sipping coffee, until the right moment comes to stand. But here's the most important part. Sam's fight isn't his alone. Every time someone records an injustice, every time someone speaks up when it's easier to stay silent, every time a community chooses unity over hate, that's when dignity wins again. This story may have unfolded in one small diner, in one small town, but its echoes belong to all of us. So now, we turn to you, the viewer. If this story moved you, if you believe in dignity, in respect, in justice that reaches beyond prejudice, then don't let this just be another video you watch and scroll past. Like this video to show your support. Comment below with your own stories of facing discrimination, or moments when you stood tall in the face of injustice. To share this story so others can see that change is possible, and that silence is never the answer. And most importantly, subscribe to join a community that refuses to look away from the truth, because together, our voices can drown out hate. Sam Washington taught us one final truth. Dignity isn't given, it's chosen. And when you choose it, no one can take it away. So choose dignity. Every day, every moment, in every diner, in every courtroom, in every street. Because when we do, the world changes, one act of courage at a time.